your flesh and blood.
Welcome to Tell Me Your Story. New paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here 9 times a week. Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will take time to subscribe and click notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be notified and you'll be able to tune in, listen in, and learn, and be entertained and inspired. A reminder that Choices, which is my book, 5 Steps for Life, it's available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle with Audible, soon to be released. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, please go to richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. If you go to richarddugan.com, there is also a link directly to PayPal so that you can send us whatever support you can. And we thank you to those who have helped and to those who will help. We also ask that you take time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with that, we now take you to our very special interview and guest here on Tell Me Your Story. Welcome to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it is a pleasure to have with us I'm not exactly sure how to put this. It's not specifically his story, but he wrote the story. It's an American hero, one man's legacy of fatherhood and faith. And my guest is the writer, if you will, along with Tom Davis Jr., Jack Watts. Welcome to our program. I'm looking forward to this, especially because of my father's passing a couple of years ago, and almost constant reminiscing in my own mind about my father and the legacy that he left. Thank you for being with us.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here. Glad to be able to talk about this great book.
Well, you know, what I find interesting is that right up until the end, my father, he certainly had his own fate, and he kept it to himself for the most part, which I thought was really, really appropriate. I wanted to ask him about it in his later years, but I figured if he wanted to share it, he would. And he basically lived it. Talk to us about this American hero in the fact that this individual that you and Tom wrote about, which my understanding is Tom's, both his father and grandfather, specifically of grandfather, they definitely left a heck of a legacy because, well, here's Tom, and he's got this wonderful book now that people can read about his father and grandfather.
Well, the hero of the story is Tom's father, Jimmy Davis. The anti-hero is the grandfather. He was not heroic. The way the whole story begins is that Jimmy Davis was born on Hanging Dog Mountain, North Carolina.
Great place, it sounds like.
Well, of course, it was always a funny kind of story with people assuming that somebody hung a dog, but it was a dog that got caught in the bushes, and an Indian, Cherokee, actually rescued the dog, and so they referred to it like that. But Tom's dad never told the truth about it. He just let people assume the former, and which horrified them, but made for great fun. Now,
Yeah.
When he was a child, there were 4 kids. The grandfather inherited $1 million, which in the 1920s would be worth about 15 million today. So there were very wealthy people, but the guy was a drinker, a gambler, and a womanizer. So he lost it all.
Mm.
His wife got brain cancer. There was no treatment for it then. So, she was diagnosed and dead very quickly. And here he was with four children. He took the three oldest, which are boys, put them in a car, drove them across state to Oxford, North Carolina, and left them at a Shriners orphanage.
Wow.
Never turned around, never came back, never called them, never wrote, never sent any money. He was done with them. They were more blessed than the youngest, which was a girl who had polio from infancy. He left her at a place where she had to fend for herself and she didn't even have siblings around to take care of her. So this story starts out with tremendous difficulties. The three boys had each other. That was good. Jimmy, when he was left, was just 6 years old.
Mm.
6.
Wow.
Older brother was 7. Younger brother was 3.5. Well, they during now this was just at the beginning of the Great Depression.
Mm.
At the orphanage, they grew vegetables to feed them. It was very meager living. But he went to school with all the other kids and played sports, and he was a tremendous athlete.
Mm.
So much so that in his at the end of his junior year, Duke University contacted him, offered him a full scholarship to be their quarterback. All he needed to do was graduate high school.
Mm-hmm.
A couple months later, the administrator at the Shriners orphanage came to the older brother and Jimmy and said, "We've got younger kids that are going to need the beds. You guys are going to have to fend for yourselves." So they gave each one of them a crisp $5 bill, sent them out the front door. One of them was just 18, and Jimmy was 17. He didn't get to finish high school, so he lost that scholarship. Instead, to survive, he started shining shoes.
Mm.
15 cents for each pair of shoes. The older brother, unable to get a job or anything, went into the army. This would be like about 1939 or 40. Jimmy, unable to survive very well on his own, finally went to the army recruiter. I mean, this kid, was a stud. I mean, he was an athlete. If you're going to be a quarterback, Duke University, you've got to be athletic, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, they asked him, said, "How old are you?" He said, "Well, I'm 18." Well, people didn't have birth certificates very often back then.
Yeah.
So they said, okay. He was just 17.
Mm-hmm.
It took him into the army, and of course he thought, I've got 3 hots and a cot. I'm okay, I'll survive. Well, he went in as a buck private, obviously. This was not long before the beginning of, oh yeah, that's right, World War II.
Yeah.
So he signed up for 3 years. At the end of his 3 years, there's no chance that they would let somebody who they'd put that much training into. So uh, he signed up for the duration plus 6 months.
Yeah.
That's what they gave you back then.
Mm.
They shipped him to England, where he was as an athlete, he was the boxing champ of his company and the whole base, welterweight.
Right.
Back then, boxing was as important as football and basketball are today. It was one of the two or three major sports for people that era. So that gave him some notoriety. When the invasion came, he wasn't one of the ones that went on the beach at Normandy.
Hmm.
He went a month later when they formed the Third Army, which was led by George Patton.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
Wow.
he marched and fought all the way across France, liberating it, was one of the guys that liberated the 102nd at Bastogne, the Battle of the Bulge, marched all the way through Germany and ended up in Czechoslovakia, which was the end of where Patton's Third Army went. Not only that, but from a buck private, he ended up becoming a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army
Mm. Wow.
because of his excellence. All the time, the only thing he wanted was to be done with this, to get back home, to have a wife, children, and the family he never had.
Mm.
Still stone broke. He ended up having to stay because he was a lieutenant, had to stay through the Nuremberg trials, went through saw the horrors of the death camps, which he said the worst part of it wasn't even seeing the corpses or the people that were alive that were like skeletons, but the smells that were associated with it, which just left an impression that you just can't. I mean, we've never had things like that happen.
Yeah.
So here's this guy, he's 23 years old by about this time, maybe 24, 25, and he's already seen more of life
Yeah.
than most people ever do. That's the
Wow.
great story of it.
Wow. There's a great line in a song that I've seen things I can never unsee.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of people have had those experiences over the generations, and it's incredible. Now, obviously, Tom not being here, certain questions that I want to ask, and I may
Well, you
ask
can
some of
answer
you
all of them
because
because I know we've
I
done a lot of interviews.
I was just going to say, but you've been around him and interviews and so forth, so you can probably speak on his behalf in that
Yes.
respect. It won't hold up in court because it's hearsay, but it's okay. This ain't a court. I'm wondering if, because obviously Tom's father, Jimmy, who went through everything you've just described, um, would not have gone through any of that if his father, Tom's grandfather, had kept them all together and he chose to be the father and raise them and teach them and guide them and so forth. And there's an interesting aspect to this question that I'm kind of posing. I have a book called Choices, 5 Steps for Life, and we're always making choices. We don't know what the conclusion will be of that choice. It may take weeks, months, or even years. And in the case of Tom's father, Jimmy, obviously he did get out of the military, and he did start a family, but obviously because we have Tom Davis Jr. Um, has there ever been a conversation regarding the grandfather and any level of understanding and or forgiveness for what he did, even though when you take a look at the lives that he impacted by what he did, the grandfather that is. Here we are, 2025, and I mean, we now have a book telling this story. I mean, that's quite a legacy. And again, if the grandfather hadn't done what he did, would you and I even be having this conversation?
That's a very good question. When Tommy was a little boy, his dad took him and his sisters to visit the grandfather who still lived on Hanging Dog Mountain. He had, in abandoning them, he found another woman and created another entire family that he stayed in contact with. When they got there, Tommy said, he was really excited to meet his grandpa. And he said, until he saw him, he said, he said he was just this washed out old rummy who lived in this shack that that was dirty, unkempt, and smelly, and he couldn't wait to get out of there. Um, Jimmy, for his part, uh, never reconciled with his dad and did not forgive him.
Hmm.
Very clearly, because when the old man died, he wouldn't even attend his funeral. He said he left us. He didn't give a what about us, and I don't give a what about him.
Hmm.
And which is sad, uh, but life.
Yeah.
And if you are deprived of a family, of a normal life, of a normal childhood, so that the person who is supposed to love you and be responsible for you can just be done with you so that he can go on with his life and find something more and new and better. It's easy to see how that would stick, but it also made him completely committed to the idea of having his own wife and own children that he would love and cherish the way in a way that they would remember and that would impact them and um, they could take with them into adulthood that would make them successful.
Hmm.
And this is kind of the key to the whole story. Tom being the only boy, there were three daughters that Jimmy also had, became incredibly successful, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And he attributes it all to the lessons he learned growing up from his father, so that, you know, people would look at their family now from the perspective of this is, maybe just a lot of privilege, but it certainly didn't begin with privilege.
Yeah.
It began with profound scarcity.
Hmm. We are talking with co-author, along with Tom Davis Jr., Jack Watts, and talking about an American hero, one man's legacy of fatherhood and faith as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, Reverend Dr. D, and we are talking about a segment of our society that gets stereotyped, sometimes gets neglected, and that being fatherhood. Not necessarily a hero, because most people who we label as heroes, they don't see themselves as that. They're just doing what they know to do. They're doing the right thing and so forth. And Jimmy, is it Jimmy Davis? He is the hero in this story. He is the focal point for the most part throughout this story, an American hero, one man's legacy of fatherhood and faith. I want to talk about that if I can. Jack. Jack Watts is my guest here on the program, co-author along with Tom Davis. This aspect of faith, and I'm going to sort of go into a bit of a niche regarding faith. One of the things that we promote on this program is encouraging people to take time during what I have dubbed this decade of perfect vision. It started out with the year of Perfect Vision 2020. And now it's the 2020s. And we ask them to take time to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still small voice. And I'll leave it at that because a lot of people, they'll use a lot of different names to describe that. I am curious as to both Tom's as well as his father's inner life and how, if it had any bearing whatsoever on the decisions that they made, both Jimmy and Tom, as they went into adulthood. Obviously, Jimmy going through the military, going through World War II, and so forth, and starting a family. What role can you share with us did their own personal faith have in who they became and who Tom, for example, who Tom has become, to share with us this legacy of his family?
Well, it it's a critical factor. There, they always say that, there are no atheists in foxholes. And he certainly spent his time in real foxholes,
Right.
not the kind of thing. I mean, you being in Patton's army marching across Europe, um, he saw a great deal of action. Coming back, and I believe it was 47. It might have been as late as 48 after going, uh, having all that he had to do with the Nuremberg trials and all the rest of that. Just all of helping to put Europe back together again because there was so much starvation and everything. And
Mm,
at that point, he'd never had a girlfriend. Now, I mean, that didn't mean that he didn't have any kind of interaction with women because he was an American soldier in Europe, and he had cigarettes and chocolate and money in his pocket when people were, so there were lots of different kind of encounters like that, but nothing that was like a real relationship.
right.
Came back to the United States, moved to Cedartown, Georgia, where the sister who'd had the polio, who never walked, became a skilled gemologist, and she worked for a jeweler creating items for people to buy. And
Mm,
so the only place that he had to go was Cedartown, and it's probably 70 miles northwest of Atlanta. And this is the rural South back before 1950,
yeah.
only half the roads were paved.
Mm,
So he starts working in this jewelry store. One day, the prettiest girl he ever saw came in looking for earrings. He took one look at her and said, "This is the girl for me." She liked him just as well. So they started dating. Now, she was Catholic. He was nothing.
mm,
She said to him, he wondered why she wasn't already married. And the reason, there aren't many Catholics in Georgia, certainly back not then. She said she wouldn't marry somebody who wasn't. And since his goal was to marry her, he started becoming a cataclysmic for the Catholic Church and sat down with a priest and started learning what Catholicism entailed. All right. So think of it this way. He was in an orphanage which was hyper structured. Then he was on his own to shine shoes and really was really destitute. Goes into the army, it's highly structured. Gets out, goes to Cedartown, and starts attending a Catholic church, which is what? Highly structured. It was the fit for him. So here he is, decides to become a Catholic. They take him through all of the lessons, from the catechism. Who made us? God made us. Why did he make us? To know, love, and serve him. Boom, 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 boom. He starts learning all this stuff. Has to go make his first confession. Could you imagine being the priest, having to listen to what a U.S. soldier
Oh my
has to
heavens.
say about, at that? I mean, just going through all that, takes his first Holy Communion, becomes a Catholic heart and soul, marries this girl, and you would like to say that they did just exceedingly well forever, but she had some problems. She would fly off the handle, and it was almost like she was bipolar, but she wasn't. She had herself a secret that she'd never divulged to anybody.
Mm.
After marriage, and this is where the book gets really tough and interesting. While they're on their honeymoon, she says, I've got something I want to tell you that I've never told anybody. He assumed that she'd had an affair with somebody or something like that. It wasn't that. It says from the time that she was like 6 years old, a professional photographer took many photos of her, but he molested her until she was 12. So she had to deal with that. And the arrested development that comes from it, once you're violated, that part of who you are stays at the age when it happens. So she's an adult in every other way until something triggers her being a 6 year old, and she acts out, throwing tantrums like a 6 year old would. Now, in all of this, she makes him promise to never tell anybody and to take it with him to his grave, which he commits to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's what people did back then. This was in the 50s now.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
And maintaining secrecy about this was what they considered to be honorable. It honorable, yes, and that he didn't violate her trust, but they did the exact opposite thing to what you should do, which is to expose the darkness.
Right.
To expose the darkness. In AA, there's a saying, and I know it because I've got like 32 years sober, so this is stuff that I know about that. It's you are only as sick as your secrets.
Mm.
So this was the secret that they shared, and when they had their children, which Jimmy being the second oldest, there were three girls and one boy. He's the second oldest. Um, the mom would be just great, and wore dresses when she cooked dinner, like you would see in Ozzie and Harriet
Mm.
or the Donna Reed show. And and something would happen, she'd fly off the handle and start throwing things and screaming and yelling and swearing. Front door bell would ring. She'd go to the door and say, "Well, hello, Mabel. How are you? Isn't everything just fine?" Because she could turn it on and off like that. But Tommy growing up was like, mom's certifiably crazy.
Yeah.
The only person that could calm her down was Jimmy. So he'd come home from the jewelry store because he continued to be a jeweler. Um, and he would take her in the bedroom, and they would sit for an hour and talk and come out, and she would be just fine. But it required the presence of Jimmy's dad to calm his mother down. So the respect that the kids had for the father just escalated,
Mm.
while they're with the mom, it was like, we love her, but she's nuts. And they didn't, and because they couldn't figure out why, and they had no comprehension of it. Now that lasted. Jimmy's dad had a always smoked. All of the soldiers did back then. Everybody that was in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. Well, there was no Air Force, and in World War II it was the Army Air Corps. But they all of them they gave them either Camels or Lucky Strikes,
Hmm.
and that was, I mean, there was no concept that there was anything wrong with it, and so they all smoked,
Yeah.
and we kept it paid a price for it. The
Yeah.
greatest generation paid a huge price. Very few of them lived out their lives the way that we would now because we know how bad cigarettes are for you
Right.
and how destructive. Well, he had a heart attack and died at 53.
Hmm.
So here is Tommy, who's 19 at the time, that his dad died, and his hero was gone. He married and had kids, but through all of that, he want what he, one of the things that he always wanted to do was write a book about his dad. But there's another issue that evolved. The youngest of his sisters was violated by a family friend the same way that the mother was, so that when that ended up being discovered, it was after the dad's death, so he had kept the secret successfully. The mom, Chloe, uh, told her uh, told her children um, what had happened. So that's how he learned how they learned about it. There, and then worse than that, the girl who was the youngest ended up marrying a guy who was also a child sexual predator
Hmm.
who violated most of the female children in this third generation. The guy ended up in prison, still in prison in Texas, because it's not California. If it was in California, he'd certainly be out doing it again. But in Texas, as in Florida and a few other states, you do bad stuff, you actually do the time.
Well, and I've only heard that in addition to doing the time, you better watch your back because apparently there are certain classes of criminals within our penal system who are at the bottom of the pecking order.
Yeah, this is they're at the bottom of the pecking order, yes, and
Yeah.
that
So,
um, and they put these people in maximum security prisons. They're not,
yeah,
you know,
because they know the system
but they know who
knows.
they are.
Yeah, they know. Well, and they also know what will happen if they put them into the general population. Uh, you know, so anyway, it's and it's sad that unfortunately these kinds of things still go on. But I will tell you that I had a similar encounter back in like 92, 93, my first marriage, with my first wife who was totally blind. Now she wasn't that type of person. However, we were going through one of these personal growth programs, and it kind of mirrors what you were talking about in terms of shedding light on the darkness or, exposing the darkness to the light, if you will. And we're going through this program. And of course, we come back from lunch and they dim the lights and they moved all the chairs off to the side and and there were probably 30, 40 people in this group. And I come into the room and there's my wife sitting on the floor with a couple of the facilitators, and they asked me to come over and sit in front of them, facing her and so forth. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? I mean, she's not going to propose to me because we're already married. I don't, this is odd. And the next thing I know, I'm learning things about her past prior to our getting together, but prior to our getting married, that she, as we all do, brought into the relationship. And the first thing that went through my head was my ego. What the hell? Why are you doing this in front of all? I wasn't saying this, it's in my head. I'm saying, why are you doing this in front of all these people? And then, of course, the other reaction to what she was saying. And when she was done, I got up and walked out. I walked out into the parking lot, walked around for a while. One of the facilitators came out to talk to me. I finally went back in. We continued the program and so forth. But what I was able to finally process was, oh, now I understand that now this and this and this makes sense to me. And it explained an awful lot. And unfortunately, the relationship, a few years, well, what was it, 99 or yeah, 1999 January, it was official. We were finally divorced. I met another woman. Now we are my second wife. And this is where, you make that commitment. I've told her, and I keep telling myself this, no matter what happens, I'm going to do everything I can to make this work. I am not going through another divorce. That's not going to happen, you know? And I've kept that commitment. And we've been together for, well, since 1990, 98, when we first met. And then, of course, after the divorce, the relationship flourished. Those are the kinds of things, Jack, that I would think that, you look back on your life as well, and you made certain choices and you went down this path and then you went down that path, and you make another choice and you make a turn here and you make a turn there. And it kind of goes to, I mean, and by the way, congratulations on 32 years of sobriety. Um, what are your thoughts, not only in terms of Tom's story and the book that you and he wrote together, but in terms of where you are today since what is your thought about on regret? Do you really think that that's something that we should have in our repertoire, regretting certain things that we have done or said or what have you? Because it's not like we can go back and change them.
Well, that is what being rigorously honest is about. It's about also about how going to people that you've wronged and acknowledging it and asking for forgiveness, uh, perhaps restoring relationships or at least bringing them to neutral, to where the poison is out,
Yeah.
is uh, is the way to function and what to do. Um, in writing this book, when you write a memoir for somebody, um, memoirs are just, oh, old Joe did this, that, and the other, and he's as good as sliced bread, and boy, and there's nothing ever wrong.
Mm-hmm.
There's never any problems. They don't go into the underside, the dark side of the belly, and we decided from the get-go
Mm-hmm.
to make this the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, which meant that we had to deal with the things that have been very difficult to live with. And when it comes to the violation of a child,
Yeah.
I don't think there is anything worse. Honestly, I don't think there's anything even close to as bad as that. I mean, you get a murderer, they kill one person, they throw them in jail for, years or life or whatever. A pedophile will take the innocence of a child 100 times, 100 different ones, if they can.
Yeah.
That's what they do, which no matter what happens, it's an issue that is never completely resolved, because once innocence is robbed of a child, you can never put it back.
Mm. We're talking with Jack Watts. He's co-author, along with Tom Davis Jr., of An American Hero, One Man's Legacy of Fatherhood and Faith, as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, along with Jack Watts, and I want to go back to this aspect of conversion. My father, my late father, has shared the story many times. When he met my mother, she was Catholic. And I don't know that it was necessarily a condition, as in Jimmy's story. However, he chose to become a Catholic because they wanted a big family and they wanted to raise them together with, the same philosophy, as I like to call it, the same tenets, if you will, beliefs and what have you. Although I will tell you that my parents were so open to allowing us to do our own searching. And that has been one of the biggest blessings that they have given both me and my brother and my four sisters. What about you and your faith? Obviously, you're in, if I'm correct, you're in a 12-step program because that's something that's ongoing, correct? That's not something that, okay, I'll do this for 6 years and then I'm done. I'm cured. I'm no longer an alcoholic or addict or whatever it is. This is something that you do until you take your last breath. Is that right?
Well, I really don't go to meetings much anymore.
Mhm.
But the lifestyle is something that I embraced from day one, so that uh, I don't think about drinking anymore. I mean, that's just a way, and I um one of the reasons that I stopped is that I didn't want my life to be cut short and to not be productive.
Mm.
And in since then, I've written 34 books.
Yeah.
Yeah, that so that that's um and maybe 10 of them are um memoirs for other people. And I wrote my own story, which is Hi, My Name is Jack, which Simon and Schuster published. It was named the Inspirational Memoir of the Year in 2011.
Wow.
And so when the way that I get people to be my clients essentially is that they'll read Hi, My Name is Jack, and they want to do their own stories, and they say, I don't care how messed up I am. There isn't anything I've done that's worse than Jack. He can write my story. He understands it. So I've done that quite a bit and continue to do that. And it's it can be difficult. Writing about pedophilia and what it does is not an easy subject to deal with. It's very hard,
Yeah.
and you have to capture not just the events, but the emotions and
Mhm.
the devastation to people's lives that come from it. So it can be really hard. Now, you were talking about, your dad and him embracing, faith like that. Back in that era,
Hmm.
uh, girls wouldn't put out unless it was for somebody that they could marry and it was a Catholic.
Right.
So he, being a red-blooded American, obviously, and being very desirous of this lady, was willing to do what she wanted him to do in order to be where he wanted to be. I think I
Hmm.
said that pretty well.
Very good. It reminds me it reminds me of one of my regular guests on this program. Dennis Henson wrote a book called Real Impact Daily Inspiration. And he says that Jimmy sounds like a person who did this. He uses the example of a big road map, and he has a class, a real estate classes, and he laid this road map out on the table one day, and he asked the students, "Where do you want to go?" And they looked at him like, "What do you mean? Where do we want to go?" He says, "Well, yeah, we got this road map. Where do you want to go?" This We don't know. He says, "That's my point. A roadmap is useless, has no value unless you know where you want to go. Jimmy knew where he wanted to go. He
Yeah.
knew what he wanted, and he did what was necessary to make it to that point. And then the beautiful thing about that is, and again, I'll go ahead and use my vernaculars of he made a choice and he matched his words and his actions and his personal input to his choice. And then when he achieved that goal, if you will, he made another one. And he'd achieved that one. And he made another, and he has this incredible family that he's left behind. But an incredible family. And I think about that with my father and my mother, who's still alive, and she'll be 91 this year. And the children and the grandchildren and the great grandchildren of my parents, um, who are hopefully making a difference in this world, living their life's purpose. It seems to me that both Jimmy, Tom, and you have found, each of you has found your life's purpose, or at least for this time in where we are, say 2025 or the 2020s. You're doing something that makes you happy, certainly is lucrative, and
Productive.
and serves people, and is
Yeah.
productive, yes, and serves people. Talk to us. Can you share with us a little of your insight, and if you've pondered that much
Yeah.
over the years?
Yeah. This is let me stick with a couple things about the book for this. In uh Jimmy knew what he wanted his son to be like. Knew that, that he wanted him to learn values that would take him through life. So when he was 8 years old, Jimmy told his son Tommy, he says, "Okay, it's summertime. You got to find a job." 8 years
Mm.
old. Well, what do you mean, Daddy? What am I supposed to do? He says, "I don't know. That's up to you. You got to figure it out." Trying to make him resilient.
Yeah.
So Tommy goes out, goes around the neighborhood, gets 8 people to say that he could mow their lawns for 250 a week. Dad comes home, Daddy, I got a job. I got, I got 8 people, and it's quite a bit of money, 250, times 8.
Yeah.
So the dad says, "Well, that's just wonderful, Tommy." Says, "How are you going to mow their lawns?" He said, "Well, with the lawnmower." He says, "Well, that's my lawnmower, not yours." Says, now I can rent it to you for 50 cents a lawn. Well, you're going to take my 50 cents. Well, there's a cost to doing business.
Mhm.
So he had to pay the 50 cents. He said, "Well, now what are you going to do for gas?" "Well, I was going to use the gas can over there." I said, "Well, that's my gas. So you're going to have to pay me 50 cents. So here is Tommy as an 8-year-old boy, um, getting $1.50, thinking his dad ripped him off. When he becomes an adult, all of a sudden it clicks into place. Okay, well, there's a cost to doing business. You got to figure that in, no matter what. If you're gonna make a profit, and if you don't calculate that, you're gonna go out of business soon.
Yeah.
Then the next year or the year after that, he got him a job picking cotton, literally picking cotton.
Hmm.
Now, when you pick cotton, the spurs in it cut your hands.
Oh.
So and it's 10 cents a pound. You got to pick a lot of cotton to make a pound. So here is um, Tommy out in the fields, and what he learned from that was you respect people who work no matter what they do. People who work for a living, and he always did. So, there was no sense of entitlement about it.
Hmm. Yeah.
Zero. And um, you know, when you look at Tommy today, he lives in a really nice house in Boca Raton, and had drives an Aston Martin convertible, um, beautiful car, and his wife's got a Bentley. So it's like,
Mm.
okay, well, these are guys that are, here's the epitome of white privilege. Well, there was no privilege. He earned it, but he's in America,
Yeah.
literally can make a success out of yourself. Other places in the world, lots of them you can't, but in the United States, you still can, no
Hmm.
matter even what, as difficult as some things are made for us, it doesn't matter. You still can do it, and you set your mind to it, you can do a whole lot. So these are the things. And, in writing this, having been through so many travails of my own, I was able to put the emotions in it and the feelings that you would go through to make the story come alive. And this An American Hero, which just by the way is distributed by Simon and Schuster, so that for as a Father's Day book. So it's a big deal. You
Yeah.
know, it's available at all Barnes and Noble and Amazon and any place you can buy a book, you can find it. Um, it's being positioned as something for a Father's Day book,
Hmm. Yeah.
and that's why we're doing that right now.
Absolutely. I remember too, one of the things that my father said to me, and I'm sure he said it to the other kids as well, but it was our conversation. And we would talk about, mom and dad and the things they did and what they did for us and so on and so forth. And he would always turn it to say that your mother is really the one who, uh, in essence, gets all the credit for raising you kids. And it took me a while. It took me several interviews on in this genre to finally understand, at least from my perspective, what he was saying. He wasn't putting himself down. He recognized the role he played, you know, maybe as the disciplinarian. I mean, he taught my brother, my younger brother, how to change the oil in our station wagon. Um, he taught me about the safety around the circular saw and all those kinds of things, among other things. But what he was trying to do and impress upon us, and it was best summed up by a comment he made about my mother's birthday as well as Mother's Day. He says, "You better not forget her on Mother's Day or her birthday, or you're going to hear from me." And so we don't. And of course, as of this conversation, both Mother's and Father's Day are just around the corner. And I think that's another aspect of fatherhood that we don't see too often, do we? And in this day and age, it seems rare that we see whether it's in the limelight, they're you know officials, public figures is what I want to say. We just don't see the fatherly aspects. Certainly, Jimmy's father was no father. I mean, yes, he contributed to Jimmy's existence with his mother, but anybody can be. And I think the phrase actually goes, anybody can be a father, but not everybody can be a dad. I think it's kind of
Yeah.
the way that goes. So Jimmy's father, he wasn't a dad. Jimmy was a dad. Where he learned that from, it's incredible that he was able to learn it, saying, I'm not going to go down that path that my biological father went and abandon my kids and so forth and so on. I want something more. Do you feel that through like the book like this, that maybe it might instill in some men to say, hey, you know what? I may not be perfect, sort of epitomized by my song I wrote, I'm a good man doing the best I can. Now, I don't have any kids, okay, but that's really where we all men need to come from. I'm doing the best I can.
Well, this is certainly the message from it, and that if you if you invest yourself into your children, there will be a reward for it.
Hmm.
Even if you're not the one that receives it, they will, and their children after them.
Mm.
Whereas the antithesis of that, if you divest yourself from your children at the end of your life, there's a price to be paid. He wasn't mourned by those he abandoned. Making that so that's a tough way to die for a man.
Yeah,
Did he deserve it? Of course he did. It's still a tough way to die.
sure. You mentioned earlier about, shining the light on the darkness or exposing the darkness to the light, if you
Mhm.
will, and telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I'll add to that, telling the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
Because when we do that, it diminishes the power that those things have on us that we're holding on to. It's not something that the rest of the world is holding on to. That's one of the reasons why I've always admired specifically certain politicians who, when they are caught, I'll use the term with their hand in the cookie jar, they admit it. Hey, I messed up. I I I admit it. I've shamed my family with whatever it was, could be sexual indiscretion, could be embezzlement, whatever. And guess what happens? In the news media, it goes away. It's when we refuse to accept who we are and the foibles, if you will, that we have in our life, that they take on a life of their own, and they won't go away until we recognize that. Is that seems to me also the message that I'm getting, which is to me so profound in this day and age.
Yeah, this is it's amazing to me that when I see people now that are caught with their hand in the cookie jar, um, they either try and justify what's unjustifiable or shift the blame to others.
Hmm.
And I think it's what makes narcissism so much more prevalent now. I mean,
Yeah.
when you and I were very young men, we didn't even know what a narcissist was.
Nope.
Now it's like it's so common that it's like well, if you ask women, more than half the men are narcissists. I don't think it's that true that that's completely true, but there's so many of them,
Yeah.
and so many people get burned by this stuff that people are more wary than they've ever been before, and
Yeah.
justifiably so.
Yeah. In psychology class when I was growing up in school, and then of course into college, talking about as a young man, I learned about the id, the ego, and the superego.
Yeah,
That was
yeah,
it. There was no narcissist.
yeah.
I'm sure it was in the vocabulary, it was in the dictionary, psychopath and sociopath, those kinds of things. And here's a real interesting irony. I interviewed someone in regards to that conversation about those elements. And they said, that it is actually possible to learn something from these people. I said, are you kidding me? He says, oh, yeah. He said, all right, granted, uh, the means justify the ends is their credo, their mantra. Okay. But here's the reality. Though you and I wouldn't do it, they get things done because the means justify the ends. Now, that's a tough one to navigate in my own brain, to wrap my brain around, It's like I think that there are other ways to get things done and do them honorably so that you walk away with your integrity intact. It's been described. I've heard it. I've heard our integrity, for example, as like a sheet of cellophane, clear cellophane. And every time you do something that is unethical, those kinds of things, along these lines, you poke a hole in it. And it gets easier and easier to poke another hole and another hole. And eventually you don't even have a piece of cellophane anymore. You just have a piece of plastic with a whole bunch of holes in it. And That's one of the things that my sisters said at my father's memorial. The phrase that I heard, and it wasn't that I disagreed with them, it's just that I never thought about it this way. Dad was one of the most honest men I have ever known. I wish my dad had been alive to hear that, you know, that
Yeah.
that coming from my sisters. And there, by the way, they, unlike my brother and I, are still married to their first husbands, and they're still and they have children. Whereas my brother and I, we've been divorced at least once. So be it. Life is what it is, and I'm learning from those experiences, just like we all are. Jack, I want to ask you before we wrap things up here, how long did it take for you and Tom to finally get this? Not so much into my hands and into the bookstores and on Amazon, and of course, it's also available in Audible form. But in terms of finally saying, "Okay, we're done. Here you go." Was it? Did you say Simon and Schuster?
Simon Schuster distributing it. It's Forefront Books is the publisher. Um, from the time that Tommy and I decided to start doing it, signing a contract,
Hmm.
it took me about 6 months to write, maybe five
Hmm.
to 6 months to write the entire story. And then when we submitted it to the publisher, um, we went through numerous iterations in order to make it what you now see. So the entire process to where it became available April 1st this year was close to 2 years. And if you have a major book,
Hmm.
2 years is what it takes.
Yeah.
If you're going to just write your own thing and put it on Amazon, we could have done it in 6, 7 months. But for it to be a big deal,
Hmm.
which it should be because the quality is there and the message internally is there, and the ability for it to help others is there.
Yeah.
So it required a good deal more in order to uh, polish it, so to speak.
Yeah. Is
And
is
the Audible book,
Go
and
ahead.
the Audible book is, which is done by Jamie Rennell, one of the top five voices for Audible books in the USA, is incredible. And it's just, it's like I catch myself. I said, "Well, what happens next?" And I wrote it. Because you just get caught up in the moment and oh my gosh, what happened?
Yeah.
And I know because I wrote it. But
Yeah.
it just makes it so much fun. And honestly, I don't know, they don't have radio shows like they used to, but
No.
those old radio shows
Hmm.
were more exciting because you had to use your imagination
Yeah.
rather than watch things explode, from all of these programs that make things up that aren't real. But so I really recommend not only the book but the Audible book.
Hmm.
It's really outstanding.
Well, I can tell you that as a kid growing up, traveling between Phoenix and Florence, Arizona to my mother's house, my grandmother, especially at night when we would drive home the 60 miles, we would be listening to a station KOOL AM. I can't remember the frequency, and E.G. Marshall and the
Yes,
CBS Radio Theater.
the macabre.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I
Yes.
love that. Scared the living you know what out of me.
Well, when I got into broadcasting, I was at the age of 21 and I was working with the director in the control room of the station I was at. And we were working on the radio theater version of the late Norman Corwin's The Moat Farm Murder. And I had a struggle at first trying to figure out what do how do we do that? I've never done this. And then it dawned on me, wait a minute. No, no, no. This is just a long form commercial. Okay. You're putting lots of sound effects and music, and you've got the cast. They're going to come in and record. That's all, just a long form commercial. And when I thought of it that way, I'm going, oh, what we're selling here is the sizzle, and that's the drama.
Yeah.
And and from then on, I was producing for the next 5 or 6 years radio theater for that station, and there's nothing like it. Some books they lend themselves to be dramatized. I have one that I still have the original cassette tape version. Back in 1990, I got a copy of this book called The Goal by an author by the name of Goldratt, an Israeli author. And last October, I went to look for it on Audible, thinking, they probably had somebody read it. Turns out it's the same dramatization. And I listened to it again, and it was so much fun to listen to. And that's exciting. So I'm hoping people will get the Audible version. You go to Amazon, I'm sure. Is there any other website we want to send people to learn more about the work that you do, or even the work that Tom is doing in regards to this particular book or other things? I mean, you said you've written 34, did you say, books?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's kept me busy. As far as for me, I'm I'm on Facebook a lot. I've got almost 30,000 followers on there because I write about a lot of things,
Hmm.
and it's Jack Watts, and I'm all over the place about
Hmm.
that. I don't. I used to have a website, but I don't. I let it go. Um, we have a website for Jimmy, and it. Let me see if I can pull it up right here.
Are you
It
saying Tommy? Or are you saying Jimmy? Or
it's for the book Jimmy.
for the
So
book? I gotcha. Gotcha.
jimmydavislegacy.com, and it's spelled just legacy is Legacy. I mean,
Got
there
it.
may be somebody that might not know how to spell
Right.
legacy, but Jimmy
Hey,
Davis ought to be pretty easy.
yeah.
jimmydavislegacy.com. And you can buy the book there as well as, just going to the bookstore.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll be linked to that website specifically so people can find out more, but certainly telling them that it's available in all of the various formats, including Audible, on Amazon. So, folks, make it a point to go there and find out more about this as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan along with Jack Watts, and it has been a real pleasure to have this conversation with you, Jack, to talk about, of course, Tom Davis Jr.'s life, his father Jimmy, and then his father, and who, at least at this particular point, I don't know if his name is mentioned in the book, but we
Oh,
could say
yes.
the name that shall be remain nameless, Voldemort.
Baltimore. Yeah. He who must not be named.
That's right, exactly. But thank you so
Death
much
Eater.
for working with him and being a part of what we're trying to do here to share new insights for living with our programmers, with our audience.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pure pleasure. Do it anytime. I'm available for you anytime you want if you want to talk about anything else.
I would love to do that. I'd love to get a list of the books that you've written, and we can dive down that particular. I'll use the euphemism, that rabbit hole. That'll be a lot of fun. I'd look forward to doing that. I do have three final questions I ask all of my guests, and
Okay.
I will ask those of you. But first, I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. New paradigms for a new world, giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and streaming live at those times at richarddugan.com. Don't forget Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m. Podcasts are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Spreaker. Let's see, we're also on, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music as well, and we're on YouTube where you can watch these conversations. We hope that you will subscribe and click notification. We also remind you that my book, Choices, is available. It's available on Amazon in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle. Audible, I'm still working on getting it posted, folks. Still working on it, and we will. And we hope you'll get a copy. We also ask that if you'd like to leave us a tip, yes, I am your waiter for this table, and I would appreciate a tip. We have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And finally, We also ask that you take time, as I mentioned earlier in the program, during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within and listen to that still small voice. So, the first of the three questions that I ask all of my guests, I ask of you, who is Jack Watts?
Well, I am divorced. I have 5 children, 11 grandchildren, 4 great grandchildren so far, which means I'm old. I uh, went to the University of Georgia. I got my master's degree at Baylor University in church state studies, which is an unusual thing. Then
Yeah.
on to do PhD work at Emory University here in Atlanta, where I did everything but the dissertation. I worked in politics. I worked for doing creative work for large Christian ministries for 40 years.
Mm.
I did the last mailing that Norman Vincent Peale ever did, and that um, Jim and Tammy Baker ever did. I was one of the vendors that, was caught up in that entire scandal.
Mm.
And eh, when I became 62 years old, I decided that instead of writing things for other people about their brochures and stuff, that I would write books. And I've been doing that ever since.
Mm. What gets you up in the morning?
Writing. And also, I'm a Christian, so I spend time with the Lord, and I write every day. Yeah, I mean, you can't write 34 books and not spend a lot of time writing. So I do that, I work out, and I follow the Boston Celtics, the New England Patriots, and the Boston Red Sox and the Atlanta Braves. And I grew up in the suburbs of Boston and Newton. You were talking about the ships going back to England.
Mm.
Uh, Newton was formed in 1630, the year after Boston, 1629. So I come from a community that did come from the ships in England, and they still have a lot of congregational churches up there.
Oh, wow. Very good. Very good. Well, final question. What was your best day?
Well, I would say that it probably was in 1964. I was in trouble, and it was the day that I made a switch from just being totally selfish to being more selfless, and that was the day that I became a Christian.
Hmm. Well, we thank you for sharing your time with us here on the program. We will have you back to talk about some of these other things because some of those areas that you talked about are interesting to me. I worked for 15 years back in the 80s and early 90s for a Christian radio station, back in the heyday of televangelism. And so that was fascinating. That was a fascinating experience for me, to say the very least. And so
I
we'll
wrote a whole I wrote a whole book about some of the things that came from all of those things, and it's called Recovering from Religious Abuse.
Oh yeah, well, there are unfortunately a lot of people who have suffered that.
Yeah,
I do remember one experience that we had at that station. We had it was predominantly local, although we had people on the radio, J. Vernon McGee, C.W. Burpo, Kenneth Copeland, Zig Ziglar, and so forth. But we also had local programmers who, and one in particular would do this prayer program. They'd come in for a half hour, an hour, and take phone calls and pray for people and for their healing and what have you. And over the years, I noticed the same people were calling over and over again. And I'm going, what's the deal here? And then it dawned on me, yeah, maybe they are calling for their healing, but actually, what they're really calling for is a connection with
yeah,
other people.
yeah.
And when that dawned on me, I'm going, yeah, keep calling because we're here.
Yeah.
We're here for you. Well, once again, Jack, thank you again for joining us here on the program. I really do appreciate it. Once again, I thank you folks for joining us here on the program. And until our next broadcast, podcast, video cast, love to Lal. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I will see you on the other side. Mike, thanks for letting me be in your life. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.